Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the Old Norse magic known as Seiðr, and more specifically, the passages in Old Norse literature that emphasize its connection with femininity and the shame of men practicing it. Now, Old Norse magic has become a popular subject in recent years, as Vikings and Norse mythology and such also become more popular. And it is fairly well known among people interested in these things that the brand or denomination or sub-school of magic known as Seiðr is the one that is viewed most negatively in Old Norse literature. It is often translated dark magic or black magic in English, and practitioners of it, the Seið Kona, Seiðr woman, or Seið Maðr, Seið man, or just Seið Berandi, bearer, carrier of Seiðr, are often translated as something like witch or warlock or other words that traditionally have negative associations in English. But these negative associations don't seem to be anything quite like what we would in recent centuries have traditionally called black magic in English. Right, if we think about something that's sort of evil or dark for someone to practice magically, we might think of something like necromancy, something associated with the use of dead bodies, the raising of the dead, perhaps the enslavement of others, that kind of thing. Instead, the negative characteristics of this magic seem to do with its sexuality, specifically the fact that while it seems actually fine for women to practice it, it is too feminine for men to practice it. So let's consider first, what is Seiðr? What are the practices that are classified under this label as opposed to other magics? We get a window into this from chapter 7 of Ynglinga Saga. This is the saga of the Ynglings, the ancestral family of Norwegian kings. And this saga is part of Snorri Sturluson's Heimskringla, a work in which he is much more interested in euhemerizing the Norse gods than he is in the prose edda. By euhemerizing, I mean he's making them into human beings. But he still describes Odin as a wizard, and chapter 7 describes all of his magical abilities. So I'm going to give you my translation of this from my upcoming translation of the prose edda and Ynglinga Saga. Odin shifted skins, then his body lay as if asleep or dead. But he was then a bird or an animal, a fish or a serpent, and in an instant he traveled to faraway lands on his errands or on others. He knew how to do certain things with words alone, such as putting out fires or calming the sea, or turning the winds in whatever direction he wanted. Odin had a ship named Skíðblaðnir, which he used to travel over great oceans, and it could be folded up on itself like a cloth. Odin kept the head of Mimir with him, and it told him a great deal of news from other worlds. And sometimes he woke up dead men out of the earth, or he sat down under hanged men. For this reason he was called Lord of the Undead, or Lord of the Hanged. He had 2 ravens, and he had tamed them and taught them language. The ravens flew far away over lands and told him a great deal of news. Because of these things, Odin became extremely wise. He learned all these skills by means of runes and the songs that are called Galdrar. And for this reason the Æsir are called smiths of Galdrar. So far we've had a description of a vast number of magical powers, some of which closely parallel the magic powers that Odin boasts that he himself knows in Havamal. But now we hear which of these powers are Seiðr. And Odin knew the skill that was most powerful, at which he practiced himself, and that was called Seiðr. And thanks to this skill, he could know people's fates, and things that were yet to come, and he could cause people death, or bad luck, or bad health, or take away someone's intelligence or strength and give it to someone else. And this magical lore, Fjolkungi, that he practiced involved so much sexual passivity, ergi, that it was not thought to be a shameless pursuit for men, and it was a skill taught to goddesses or priestesses, gyðjunum, which can mean goddesses or priestesses. So here we have Seiðr not only associated with sexual passivity, that's how I'm translating ergi. Ergi is the noun, what you would accuse a man of if he is a homosexual. The adjective form is argur, which is often used in the sagas to insult a man for being cowardly or weak or other traits traditionally associated with homosexuals. So here what it seems to be is that this is actually fine for women. It is not a shameless pursuit for men. It is a skill taught to goddesses or priestesses, so to female figures. And what these pursuits seem to be are knowing people's fates, things that are yet to come, so some knowledge of the future, presumably direct and direct and conscious attempts to know the future, because in the sagas, men who know the future sort of by accident, who have dreams or visions or something like that, they don't get accused of ergi or practicing Seiðr. But also causing people death, bad luck, bad health, taking away someone's intelligence or strength and giving it to someone else. And sometimes in the sagas we see that a Seiðr kona will take someone's, typically a stepdaughter or something like that, take her and switch her appearance with that of a troll or something like that. Or in the saga, the Volsung, Signy has her face switched with that of a vulva who visits the kingdom. Alright, but now let's see a couple other magical skills in the rest of Chapter 7 of Ynglinga Saga that seem not to be counted under Seiðr. Odin knew where all metals were hidden in the earth, and he knew songs that would open up the earth in front of him, or open up boulders or stones or burial mounds, and he could restrain their inhabitants with words alone and go in and take what he wanted. Because of these powers he became very famous. His enemies feared him, and his friends relied on him, and they believed in his power and in him himself. And he taught most of his skills to the sacrifice gods or sacrifice priests, blot goðunum. Again, this could mean gods or priests. They were next to him in all wisdom and magical lore, fjolkungi. But many other men learned quite a bit of it, and from them magical lore, fjolkungi, has spread far and wide and been practiced a long time. And people worshipped Odin and the 12 chieftains, and they called them their gods and believed in them for a long time afterwards. So he also has skills of finding things under the earth, which includes in burial mounds, restraining the inhabitants of burial mounds, which might, again, to us sound a little bit more like what would be counted as dark magic, but here it seems like we've moved on from the dark magic category of Seiðr. Now, elsewhere in Ynglinga Saga, we are told by Snorri that it was Freya who kendi fyrst með awesome Seið, taught Seiðr first among the Aesir. Now, Freya is a Vanir goddess, and elsewhere in Ynglinga Saga, Snorri says that the Vanir tolerated certain sexual practices with relatives that were not tolerated among the Aesir. So it's possible that a certain looseness of sexual behavior and standards to sexual behavior was tolerated among the Vanir that wasn't among the Aesir, and thus this practice of Seiðr, which seems to involve some kind of sexual shame, might believably be credited to the Vanir before the Aesir. But in Völuspá, the poem in the Poetic Edda that narrates the beginning and end of the world, in stanza 22 we read that it was Heiðr, a mysterious female figure, often assumed to be Freya, but we really don't have too many concrete reasons to think she's Freya, who first, Kuni Seið, the first new Seiðr. But at any rate, it is a female figure at the beginning of the Norse cosmos who is knowledgeable in and who is teaching Seiðr. And of course, we can see that Freya does know some magic, although it's not clearly Seiðr magic, as she awakes a vulva in Völuspá and Skama or Hyndluljóð, just as Odin awakes a vulva in Baldur's Draumar. So, if this is a woman's art, it's also quite interesting to note that Romans wrote about a millennium earlier than our Norse sources that women had a certain strongly clairvoyant role in the Germanic tribes they encountered. Tacitus in his Germania in chapter 8, and here I am translating the Latin, so I'm leaning on that classics undergraduate background. Tacitus says, "They even impute a special kind of holiness and clairvoyance to women, and they neither spurn their advice nor neglect their answers. We saw that during the reign of Vespasian, Veleda was regarded by many of them as having the place of a goddess, and once Aurinia and many other women were venerated, not slavishly, and not as if they just wanted to make up goddesses." So these women have a special kind of holiness and clairvoyance. Their advice is heeded, and their answers are listened to when questions are asked of them. And Tacitus even points out a couple of women who were venerated in this way in his time by Germanic-speaking tribes. And I'm using the term Germanic speakers, Germanic speaking to translate Latin words like Germani, to remind us that these are cultural linguistic groups that are connected to other Germanic speaking groups, the Norse, the English, the later Germans, etc. Here's what Seiðr says in his Gallic Wars, Book 1, Chapter 50, explaining why a certain group of Germanic tribesmen had not come to a battle. "Because among the Germanic speakers it was the custom for their mothers of the family, matres familiae eorum, that they declared from lots and divinations whether to commit to battle or not. And they had said thus, that it was not for the Germanic-speaking people to conquer if they went to battle before the new moon." So here we have another Roman remarking on the way that Germanic-speaking people, again 1,000 years before our Norse sources, or even our very early Norse sources like Völuspá might have been composed, but quite interestingly remarking the importance of women as figures who cast lots, who make divinations, who decide when the appropriate times for things in the future are. I think that's quite interesting. And elsewhere in Norse literature, we see that men are accused of this sexual passivity, sexual shame, ergi, when they practice Seiðr. For instance, in Gisli's saga, the saga of Gisli Sórsson, here's my translation of an interesting excerpt. "Then it happened that Borkr paid Thorgrimr Nose to do some Seiðr." It says, Seidi Seidr, practice Seiðr, so that no one could help Gisli. Thorgrimr Nose was given a 9-year-old steer for this. Now Thorgrimr did the Seiðr, and he prepared all the equipment in his usual way, and made himself a scaffold, hjallr, and he did this magically, with all sexual passivity and devilry, með aldri ergi og skelmiskap. Now that hjallr, that scaffold that he uses, is also associated with vulvas in, for instance, the saga of Hrólfr Kraki, which I have a forthcoming translation of, and in the saga of Eiríkr the Red, we also see that a vulva, in that case Thorbjörg, sits on a scaffold when she visits the farm in Greenland to foretell how the famine that she's been asked to predict the end of will end. So, while this isn't a complete look at Seiðr and its practices and associations, I think that this is at least a window into the way that the magic associated with seeing the future is associated with being a woman, being sexually defined in that role, and that men, even though it's not clear what exactly they have to do to be considered to be argued to do this, maybe they have to wear women's clothes, for instance. In the saga of Eirik the Red, the vulva Thorbjörg's clothes are described in great detail, so maybe men have to dress that way too, and in wearing women's clothes, maybe that's what's making them arger. Maybe they actually have to do some sexual thing that's arger. It's never clear what has tainted this so much with this mark of feminine sexuality, which is, of course, in a society like that of the Norse, very bad for men to have any sort of associations with. But it's clear that association was strongly there. Now keep in mind that in the Norse world, the roles of the sexes, the worlds of the two sexes, were much more delineated than I think even the most rigidly traditional societies of today are. For the most part, during the daytime, women and men truly would inhabit separate worlds, with women being left to maintain the household, the indoor stuff, to raise the children, to do a certain amount of work with domestic animals, while men would be out doing most of the outdoor work. We see this in the way that a privileged woman is often described as hvítur, literally white, or other words that imply pale skin, and that's considered attractive because it implies that the woman is higher class and doesn't have to work. Whereas for a man to be described that way, except in some unusual cases like the gods Heimdallr and Baldur, where it may mean something else, is bad. Men shouldn't be pale. They should show some color from working out in the sun, and but at the same time not too much, because then it's slavish. If your skin has been very sunburned, as we see in the description of the original thrall or slave in Ríkstula, then that shows that you're very low class. But anyway, men and women would inhabit basically different work worlds. So there would be, and they had different clothes, sometimes legally defined different clothes, as we see in the saga of the people of Laxardal, where Gudrun and then the man that she's divorcing her husband for both divorce their spouses for wearing the opposite sex's clothes. It's today in 2018 and most of the United States perhaps, there's not as much of a barrier, a wall between what is women's realm and what is men's realm. But in the tension and the anxiety over the ergi associated with the practice of Seiðr, we see how much of that anxiety, how much of that wall there was between the world of men and the world of women in the Viking Age. All right, well, as I've got Hugin and Moonin, I suppose, croaking all over here and flying back and forth behind me today, I hope that this video has been somewhat interesting or informative for you. I hope you'll check out my related video on the vulva. I decided not to remake that in talking about this today, but just to sort of expand on the sexual associations of Seiðr in its own video. I'll link that in the end screen. I've already linked it in a card too. I've also translated the Poetic Edda and the Saga of the Volsungs, which I hope you'll check out. I also, as I've alluded to, begun working on 2 other commissioned translations, the Saga of Hrólfr Kraki with the Saga of Hervor and Heidrek, and on the Prose Edda, which will include the Saga of the Inglings, which I quoted from extensively at the beginning of this video. My videos are supported by the generous donations of my Patreon supporters, some of whom are thanked at the end of this video. For now, from beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best. I'll let you listen to the ravens a little more.